It is January 30th, and seeds are stirring, dreaming, about to wake deep within the earth that is holding them close and warm to her breast as they prepare for the coming time of growth. Take a moment, if you will, to cast your attention down beneath your feet, beneath the floor and foundation keeping you warm, beneath the cold first layer of earth, through the rich soil. The seeds of the spring's first flowers are already stirring there. Can you feel them deep below you? Those early first blades of grass that remind you every year why spring green is its own Crayola shade, they are preparing for a soon unfurling. And in the trees, the sap is beginning to rise, and in the animals, the milk is beginning to flow. In the pagan wheel of the year, we have reached the time of Imbolc, when we are outwardly very much in the frigid, leafless gray of winter, but when the dream of spring is awakening in the ground of our hearts and in the soil of earth alike, full of potential and creativity and imagination. The Celtic figure of Brigit is a symbol of this portion of the year in both Celtic Christian and Celtic pagan traditions. She is known to represent healers, poets, metalsmiths, and brewers, all those who transfigure one thing into another, wound into proud flesh, word into revelation, molten metal into tool, grain into revelry. They say she was born in a threshold, goddess of the in-between. And this moment in the turning of the seasons is a time of profound transformation slowly unfolding. It is a liminal time between the solstice and the spring, a time betwixt when the wheel is turning and we are hanging on. Last week, I was home with my kids quarantining. We all sat down together to watch a new Disney movie, and I realized that across the span of our 2 COVID winters, the fuzzy blankets in our living room had multiplied. Everyone in my household has their own now, even the dog, and the children each have an extra. As I snuggled up in my fuzzy blanket, which is covered in flowers, I was reminded of the poem that we shared this morning. The lively image of Marge Percy wrapped up in a blanket on her couch, surrounded by icy sleet, but dreaming of her summer garden and ordering way too many seeds. That is what this time of year feels like to me, hunkered down and dreaming, cold fingers and warmth rising within, blankets and seed catalogs. There are more storms of ice and snow coming, more frigid days, but something is stirring. Something is stirring. And in this particular year, I can't help thinking that the turning of the season echoes the historic moment we find ourselves in. We are collectively wintry and hunkered down, aren't we? Still, in some ways, in the winter of 2020 that never quite ended. We are 2 years into a global pandemic that has revealed beautiful and very terrible things about the nature of our community, our nation, our world, and our humanity. We just marked the anniversary of a violent insurrection by white supremacists at our nation's capital. We've watched the effects of climate change gain breakneck speed and our world leadership respond too slowly. We've awakened ever further to the supremacy and inhumanity embedded in the foundations of most of our systems and institutions, we have watched the veil lift on all that was fragile and punishing in our economy, our community. And many of us are wintry. Many of us are tired, traumatized, triggered, and burned out. We are hunkered down, perhaps curled up in fuzzy blankets just to get through the day. And at the very same moment, we are witnessing stirring seeds of transformation that we never imagined perhaps could take root. Uprisings for the sanctity of Black life have swept the nation and gained the most traction they've seen in the last half century. Mutual aid has emerged in every corner of every community as we've witnessed that perhaps all those barriers we put in the way of care for one another were not so necessary after all. People have left unjust employment en masse and forced lifting wages and other labor wins. Structures of oppression are crumbling, and while the backlash is fierce, suddenly maybe we find the space to imagine what could replace them. So even as we are hunkered down, perhaps some of us are nurturing wild seeds of hope, are dreaming, and are realigning our own lives in small and large ways toward greater resilience and compassion. It is all true at once, the winter and the seeds of spring, and this is the character of our moment in history. Like the sap in the trees and the goddess in the threshold, we are in between. In between the height of the pandemic and its end, in between the crumbling and the building, in between what we no longer are and what we will yet become. We are still freezing, but the seeds are stirring below us. This is true globally. And it is also true in our congregation, where it feels to me that we are poised together on the brink of a new era. We are poised at the brink of new ways of doing and being church as we muddle our way into combined in-person and online ways of being community. We are poised at the brink of growth in our music program, children's programs, and all our programs. We are in between. We are in between some programs ending or pausing due to the pandemic, and some programs reimagining themselves. We are in between sizes in a way that sometimes stretches our capacity and resources and often feels awkward for volunteers and staff who can see the dream of all we could be. We are in between committing to radical welcome and inclusion and actually being able to embody that inclusion in our space as we move toward installing our improvements this summer. And we are in process. We are in the process of deepening important relationships. We are in the process of rethinking some of our systems and ways of doing things. We are in the process of examining and transforming our institution toward greater liberation and thriving, of learning what will serve our community in this age of crumbling and transformation. In some ways, as we celebrate our founding this morning, I wonder if our founders would recognize us today, live streaming from an empty sanctuary to protect our community and healthcare system. In other ways, I think that our founders would still be right at home in this house of hope they built for us. Certainly, they would be proud that we are following the science. 71 years ago on Friday, our beloved founders held their first organizational meeting for the Unitarian Fellowship of Columbia. Philip and Ruth Stone were there, Addison Gullix, Frank Mott, Huber Croft, and others. They had a dream of a place for liberal sentiment and religion to grow in soil that was not so conducive to it. And they nurtured that dream. When we look to our founding and to the future at once, it's important to name the DNA of our community, the core identity we carry with us, a bright star in a wandering time of change. We will always be, in some essential way, who we were, even as we are transformed. And this is a congregation that from its founding has always found a way forward through perplexing times. The Women's Auxiliary saved stamps and coupons to acquire chairs for us one by one. The founders planted trees along the front of our property and hauled water in buckets to keep them alive before utilities stretched down this street. Together, our forebears did every bit of the hard work of building a house for us, materially and spiritually. A home for liberal religion in Columbia that was warm and creative, practical and reasoned and hopeful. I don't know if they could have foreseen the long winter that lay ahead of us these last 2 years, but our founders prepared us for it well. They laid in resources and gave us a core identity of shared ministry. They knew for 2 decades between their founding and completing the building I preach to you from now that the church is its people, not the roof over their head. And I think they knew, because they lived their own hardships and joys, that spring would always circle back around for our community, for our congregation, and in our world. Our founders worked so hard to build this place for us. I think they knew what it is to be at once hunkered down and dreaming. I have to tell you, when I curl up on my couch under a blanket like Marge Percy, I am not perusing seed catalogs. I'm dreaming about church programs. All the ways we can grow our spirits, the ways we can gentle the crumbling and put our hands toward the building, the ways we can nurture seeds of liberation in our hearts and community. I will admire the juicy baby-bottom tomatoes of you who grow food and the hubcap zinnias of our flower gardeners, but as for me under my blanket, I am scribbling plans for a new network of small groups devoted to realigning our daily lives with a more just world. Spirit-based reflection and practice groups for climate resilience, dismantling racism, fat liberation, alternate economy, disability justice, parenting for liberation, and more. I am under my blanket listening to Violet's newest song and dreaming of the day when we can all sing together again, with her and with each other, and when she can work with our kids to develop a children's music program and jam with all of us in songwriting workshops and remind us that music saves us all. I am huddled under my blanket, centering with a profound reflection by Jamila, and imagining our joyful return to ever fuller multi-generational community, a need we understand more profoundly than ever after witnessing the deathliness of an American culture that isolates us and abandons us to age cohorts, rather than nurturing multi-generational communities with care for our elders, support for our young families, and mutuality for us all. I am huddled under my blanket listening to the Reverend Dr. C.W. Dawson preach to us and remembering that building bridges across difference is the only way forward to true resilience for our community and the only path to the world we dream about. I'm imagining how we can become more reliable to relationships of justice by engaging in repair and reparation, showing up, leveraging and redistributing our resources for liberation. We may be huddled under our blankets right at this moment, but seeds are stirring. Seeds are stirring, dreaming, waking within our hearts, within our congregation, and within the world, even as we continue to pivot in our long winter of pandemic church life. We are still hunkered down, but I see a time ahead of us soon When the seeds our founders planted and the seeds we are dreaming begin to sprout forth and blossom, the sap is rising. It is rising. I see a refulgent summer ahead in the life of our church. It is coming down the turning wheel of our life cycle. We are poised on the brink between winter and spring, between a great resignation and a great realignment, a great turning to give life-giving and nurturing systems and processes a chance to grow. We are poised on the brink together in this season, and we are ready. Let us be for one another the hope that will carry us forward.